You are live.
Well, welcome everyone to another episode of WA This Week. Look, sans TikTok this week because we left our burner phone somewhere else. But anyway, look, thanks very much for watching. Covered three topics today. I want to talk about the Voice referendum, which is coming up very soon on the 14th of October. Also want to talk about a couple of conferences that I presented at last week. One was a Critical Minerals and Energy Conference in Perth, and the other was a small business conference held in Melbourne, which I found very interesting and informative. But first, the Voice referendum. You know, one of the things that's been mentioned really right from the start of this whole this public discussion on the Voice has been the need for respectful debate. And I can say I've been extremely pleased that the No campaign has done that. I think the assertion at the start was that somehow or other the No campaign, would be going to the gutter, and I think they have conducted themselves in an exemplary way. But boy, have the Yes campaigners, I think, really done themselves no credit whatsoever with the way they've behaved in this debate. Many of them. I attended a country agricultural show a couple of weeks ago, the Corrigan show, their 100th show, which was a great event. And some chap, I was standing at near Rick Wilson's stand, Rick Wilson being the federal member for that area. He had Vote No posters up, and I was standing next to one of those posters. Some chap came up, an older gentleman, quite well dressed and so on, and started taking a photo, so I engaged with him, said hello. He just unleashed a tirade of the most foul verbal abuse at me because I was standing there next to that poster. And I thought, boy, that is the hallmark of the Yes campaign debate, and that is, if you don't agree with them, they will abuse you and bully you. And we've seen that in a number of different ways. But what I did want to cover off on was the federal member for Curtin, Kate Chaney. You may have seen reports in the press, but I'll quote what Kate Chaney said. It's reported in Perth Now on Thursday, the 28th of September. It was reported in other outlets as well. She's talking about the door knocking and what she's seeing when she door knocks. And she says, in a well-educated electorate, undecided Curtin voters are looking for facts, not scare campaigns. Now, I think there's a pretty clear implication in what she's saying, but I won't go down that path. But I will agree with her. I think people are looking for facts. And what the facts tell you is that if this Voice referendum were to succeed, it would be an absolute disaster for Australia. It would fundamentally divide Australia on the basis of race. And I want to go through that a little bit, and I'll just go through the reasons because we are getting into the debate, and I'm happy to contribute to that debate as I've done on a number of occasions. The first reason you should vote no is that if this referendum succeeds, there will be a separate section in the Constitution which demands that Aboriginal people have to be consulted on matters affecting Aboriginal people. Now, well, what matter doesn't affect Aboriginal people? They're people. So it means everything that goes through Parliament for one. But of course, the second thing is it brings the High Court into that process. And I've discussed this before, but the whole issue of has the consultation been proper with the right people consulted? Does consultation mean a consensus? Does it mean agreement? If there's disagreement, and so on. So, and that's why you would grind the nation to a halt on critical decisions where there was controversy. The other one is that there's already massive representation in Canberra. And I want to take you through this a little bit. If we go through, there's a group called the National Indigenous Australians Agency, NIAA. And I want to read out what this agency does. Now, this agency has a budget of $2.6 billion. This is an agency that already exists in Canberra, and it goes through, it's established as an executive agency on the 1st of July 2019. The NIAA is a non-corporate Commonwealth entity subject to the PGPA Act, which is around public governance. The NIAA is responsible for leading and coordinating the Commonwealth's policy development, program, design, and implementation and service delivery for First Nations people. The NIAA provides advice on whole-of-government priorities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to the Prime Minister, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, the Assistant Minister for Indigenous Affairs, and the Special Envoy for the reconciliation and implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I won't talk about the Uluru Statement of Heart, but there's been plenty of public commentary on that as well. But can I say, here we have an agency that's been going, here we are in 2023, 4 years later. That agency does everything that I've heard the Voice would do, and apparently we're told that that is completely failing, and I think that's right. There are something like 18 separate Indigenous lobby groups, organisations in Canberra today, and yet when we come out to regional Australia, and particularly regional Western Australia, we see the greatest dysfunction in those Aboriginal communities. It's not for want of voices in Canberra. In fact, I think perhaps that's part of the problem, and that is there are a lot of people that derive a very good living and have a high status being in Canberra, where there aren't people out in the communities dealing with the real problems. People like to make out that this is a highly sophisticated issue. The reality is that in many of those, particularly those remote Aboriginal communities, if you go back 30 years, there were more kids at school, there were fewer health problems, there were more adults in full-time employment than there is today. That's the reality of what's happening out in those communities. Now, in metropolitan areas, it's different, and I've talked about that before. And in metropolitan areas, overwhelmingly, Aboriginal people are just getting on with life and doing all the things that everyone else does. They've got jobs, the kids are going to school, and all those things are working out. It doesn't mean there's not disadvantage for some, but for the great majority, they're just getting on with life, like everyone is. But in those remote communities which are used, I must say I've been really confronted, by the use of, a young Aboriginal boy in that advertisement for the Yes campaign. I think that's appalling. To put that there, anyway, I won't go on about that because I could, but, just appalling. But the reality is that this will make no difference whatsoever. If it were to get up, will make no difference whatsoever to the fate of Aboriginal people in those communities. Simply another group of people in Canberra, and as I say, a huge risk. And as I've said to you many times, at the core of all of this, how could anyone countenance that you're going to permanently divide Australians on the base of race in the Constitution? That's just wrong. It's wrong. I don't know how anyone could put up that contention. It is fundamentally at odds with, I think, the values that the great majority of Australians hold. So, yes, for Kate Chaney, I think intelligent people are looking for facts, and when they look at the facts, and we're seeing this in the polling that's coming out, Western Australians in my electorate, and that's in my electorate is a subset of the electorate of Curtin, which Kate Chaney represents. But Western Australians right across or Australians right across our nation are saying, you know what, this does not stack up, and we're going to vote no. And I'd like to say the other thing is, the idea that somehow there's an elite that are looking for the facts. Well, no, everyone's looking for facts. That's what I find constantly. When I go out into the community, I don't find, people out there, this idea that we split people on educated people and uneducated people. Some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, there have been people that haven't had the advantage of tertiary education or even secondary education, but they're outstanding people and make a valuable contribution to our community. They're looking at that and saying, no, I encourage you to vote no. Please turn out on October the 14th. It is, the real biggest risk, I think, for this referendum is that people think it's defeated and that they won't come and vote. So please come out and vote. It's critically important for our nation that you vote no. I did actually, look, I won't go down this other path on that respect thing. There was something else I was going to talk about, and that was the comments made by Marcia Langdon, who said, every time the no case raises their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say that's where it lands, or sheer stupidity, Professor Langdon says. So apparently, if you're voting no, you're a racist or you're stupid. Well, I don't think that, with all due respect, Professor Langdon is any stranger to making really extreme and offensive statements like that. But what I was surprised to see in that interview, which was it was a televised interview, was the Honourable Don Punch, Western Australian Minister for Fisheries and member for Bunbury. He sat there nodding, agreeing with it. So that's what he thinks about the people in Bunbury. That's what he thinks about the people in Western Australia. Didn't stand up and go, no, I don't agree with that. Just sat there with a grin on his face, nodding in agreement with what was said. You know, Don Punch should apologise to the people in his electorate for not defending them, for allowing them to be labelled with those terms. I'll move on to the other couple of topics I wanted to talk about. One, last Wednesday, I had the opportunity to give a paper to a critical minerals and energy conference in Perth, held in Perth. Good turnout of folk there. And my paper was titled Public Policy and Arithmetic, Why Politicians Need to Understand Maths. And what I was looking at in discussing in that paper was the utter and complete lack of rational analysis of government policy in this area. It's purely based, it's a bit like The Voice, it's purely based on the vibe. And I just feel it in my heart that this is right. Now, look, it's important, you know, we all have our emotions about things and, you know, they usually come from somewhere, you know, from the right sort of place. But you don't base public policy purely on the vibe, how you feel. You base it on detailed analysis. What's the impact of that legislation going to be? What could the unintended consequences of that be? And look, I don't have enough time, you know, in this short format to go through that in detail. I won't go through my whole paper. I can say, if you want a copy of the paper, just send an email to cottesloe@mp.wa.gov.au and my staff member will flick you a copy because I think it's a good read. But, you know, I'll just look at the sort of bottom line. There are a couple of things here. One, the cost of what is being proposed out to 2030 is utterly and totally unachievable. If you look at the published data which indicates expenses, you're talking about spending somewhere around $400 billion a year on year for the next 7 years to achieve that level of reduction. You're looking for something like a 14-fold increase, 14 times what we have now in solar and wind to achieve that target in the next 7 years. This is something that would bankrupt the nation, is utterly physically unachievable. But the worst part of it is that federal Labor bill that was introduced to compel the businesses to comply has a carbon tax. We don't talk about this enough, a straight-up carbon tax. So the businesses that can't comply year on year, in the first year they have to pay a carbon tax on their 5% of the emissions. The next year is 10%, 15% and so on, out across the forward years. Now, that is going to shut down every major high-energy manufacturing facility in Australia, an industry that I was passionately involved in, 20 years in the aluminium business. I worked with Alcoa in the alumina refinery part of their business. Every aluminium smelter in Australia is going to get shut down. Every alumina refinery will eventually get shut down by that policy. They cannot possibly, it is impossible in the time frame that's been set, impossible for them to meet that level of offset. And if they pay the tax, it'll financially cripple them. Not 1 tonne less alumina or aluminium will be made because of that. It will simply be made in China. In Australia, alumina and aluminium are made with natural gas. In China, it's made by burning low-grade brown coal. The carbon emissions from that are double the carbon emissions from making those products in Australia. Double. Now, the whole problem of global warming is not a local problem. It's not what you do locally in the sense that the impact is a global impact. It's what impacts the global atmosphere. So we're going to see a worse outcome environmentally. The environment is going to be substantially worse off because of those excess emissions out of China. And we're going to destroy tens of thousands of really high-quality jobs. So, you know, really, if you're into this, happy for you to say, right, you know, send an email in. We'll flick you the paper and you can have a look at it, and happy for your comments. The other thing I attended was a small business conference in Melbourne. Almost half of our economy is small business. It's a huge part of our economy, but it's really ignored at most levels of government. And I've seen it. I've seen it since I've been in state parliament. You know, if Rio or BHP's got a problem, boy, government's all ears. You know, they'll deal with that straight away. Small business, because it is so, so diverse, most small businesses are actually single operators. And boy, what are they trying to do? They're trying to survive. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to thrive, but they are the backbone of our community, the backbone of employment. 40% of all apprentices are trained in small business, for example. Those apprentices are the ones that then go on to the Rios and BHPs. So they are the backbone of our community, and they are just hit at every level, and I really don't have time to go through it now. But, IR laws, these new IR laws the federal government are proposing, is going to be enormously destructive. Look, big businesses, they've got whole teams of people that work out compliance with laws. But of course, for a small business person, you're a sole operator, you've got to do your BAS statement. You've got to do all of your records. You'll have casual employees for things. You're dealing with suppliers. And critically, you've got to actually go and do work. And you've got customers. So, those new laws are going to be a disaster. The federal Labor government needs to modify their bill so that we're not hitting the small businesses. We're dealing with where they say the problem is, which is with the big employers. There's a whole range of measures. Payroll tax is another area. I know it's a sort of a common one to go to, but my colleague, Dr. Steve Thomas, the Honourable Dr. Steve Thomas, who's the Shadow Treasurer, has announced some good policy on our side of politics in relation to relief on payroll tax, because at the end of the day, it's a tax on job. Look, it's a big tax for government, and that's why they keep it. But you need to make sure that you're not really hurting small business, which is so important to our community. The other one is, and it's just a simple one, instead of a government threatening and bullying and cajoling small business, put their arm around their shoulder and help them. Most small businesses just need a little bit of help. When a law changes, make it easy for them to understand. Make compliance easy. There are so many bits of paper, I'm sure some of you are in small business, you know what you have to do. Don't add more bits of paper that people have to put in. Look at the information that's already been collected and work out how you use that. And if anything, cut it back. The sole operator business shouldn't have to face the same regulatory burdens that Rio or BHP face. They're completely different. So, look, it was a really interesting conference. I must say I've picked up a really good raft of ideas. So, Ann Nolder and the Small Business Association of Australia have done a great job at that conference. Actually, this week, I attended another forum in Perth, the Council of Small Business Associations in Australia, who put on a forum with the Commonwealth Bank along the same topic, and it was great to hear from them as well. So that is a big focus of mine. That's one of my shadow portfolios. And again, we'll be coming out with some really, I think, effective policy in this area for the election. Look, I'll stop there. Probably gone on. So thank you very much for listening. Look, always welcome your comments. TikTok is normally our source of questions, so I'm not sure if we had a chance to have any questions today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, look, put your comments on the post, and really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thank you.
Yep, lots of comments on Facebook today. James asks, can we focus on the cost of living rather than the voice after October 14th?
Yeah, look, James, absolutely. And I was at a function last night with my colleague, the Honourable Senator Dean Smith, and at a community forum. And that was very much the focus of saying, let's get the voice out of the way. And absolutely, the cost of living is killing people. I was interested in, if you look at the, small business, for example, payment defaults to small business have more than doubled since 2020. So you're really starting to see the effects of people struggling to pay their bills, because small business is devastating. Most small businesses on average have got 3 months cash in hand, so they just can't afford it. And, for individual households, Perth has the highest level of mortgage defaults in Australia. So it is a real worry, and that's going to get worse, so absolutely. And you know what? The state government, have a look at Water Corp. Water Corp reports a $1.2 billion profit from you. This is a government agency providing a basic service, i.e. water, you die without it, and they're making a $1.2 billion profit on it. There's real opportunity for the state government to provide a lot more relief to households in Western Australia.
Brian asks, it's my belief that politicians can only be referred to as honourable if they are a minister or have been one. Your thoughts?
Look, there's two things. Upper House are special. So all of the members in the Upper House in Western Australia, for example, are referred to the title honourable. And look, even ministers, I think they've got this is not I've been in Parliament for 6 years. I've never been a minister, so haven't had to worry about that. But I think a minister has to be a minister for a certain term, a certain period of time to be referred to as honourable. If Upper House members, I think if it's more than 6 years, I think it is, but I'm happy to be stand corrected on that one. They actually carry that title honourable after they leave Parliament as well.
And that says politicians should be standing up and demanding the voice referendum be cancelled and the money be spent elsewhere.
You are dead right. Look, I was just looking at that. You can only cover so much in the time of these forums, but the cost of that referendum, I see the public figures are $365 million. We're told that the Yes campaign, they've got literally, there must be tens of millions of dollars. I've talked about this before, how in goodness name, public companies donated massive millions and millions of dollars to one side of a partisan political debate is utterly beyond me. Boy, I hope some shareholders, any of you who are shareholders of these bigger organisations like Wesfarmers and the mining companies and the others that put money into the Yes campaign, go to the annual general meeting and ask the board to explain themselves. But all of those groups, imagine if that money actually went to the communities. Do you know how you solve the problem of dysfunction in those communities? How you deal with it? Go into the community and solve the problems. I talked about this, I think, before in Aboriginal community in Carnarvon. It's the short walking distance from the centre of a large, prosperous, bustling town, and that you would see the worst social outcomes you'd see anywhere in the world, I think. And, you've got these doctors' surgeries and different things, agencies that are in the town. This community is a short walking distance away. If they just took a bus with a nurse and a doctor and a dentist, into the community on a regular basis, formed relationships with people, those kids could be living healthy lives. Make sure the kids go to school. This stuff ain't rocket science. And as I say, that's what happened. I grew up in a small country town. Every young Aboriginal kid in the town went to school. I'm not a teenager anymore. So these outcomes have got substantially worse in regional Western Australia. So put that money, and those companies, instead of putting that money, and let's face it, they're trying to virtue signal to say they think this is buying a social licence to operate. That's what they think. I think it's just appalling, as I say, to think you'd do that by entering a partisan political debate. Yeah. But in any case, how about they put some extra money into the communities where they're deriving their income and start dealing practically with the social problems that exist in those communities? That'll fix the problem, not some abstract concept dreamed up in Canberra.
Shane asks, can we get your comments on the proposed changes to firearm legislation in WA? Seems pointless to retrospectively penalise fire owners with 20, 30 or 40 years of safe use and ownership.
Yeah, look, and I'll be honest with you, when we're dealing with so much legislation, you read the detail when you need to go through it. But, I'll say this, how many of the serious and violent crimes in Western Australia are carried out with licensed firearms? And, if you actually look at it, that it just, the evidence doesn't stack up in relation to this. So this is a government thumping their chest, and, I've said it before, Paul Papalier, he's a nice enough bloke, but he just loves standing next to police with pictures of firearms and beating his chest and saying how they're going to fix crime. You know what? Under this Labor government, violent crime has increased by 20%. Every serious crime statistic has got substantially worse since this Labor government's been in power. because they focus more on getting a picture on the front of the West with Papalia standing, or the Premier of the day standing beside, some firearms, than they do actually getting out there, working with the police, giving them the resources to deal effectively with those serious criminal matters in the community. And that's the problem with this legislation. I will look into the detail. I agree with you that this idea of, somehow, the demonising of weapon owners as somehow, they're immoral people. I mean, it's just really appalling, just base, gross politics. So demonising a group of people who overwhelmingly are fine, upstanding, good citizens, out there as good members of the community, and happen to need a gun for their work, or they like owning a weapon. But the other one is it'll make no difference. It's just another headline for the government, and it will achieve nothing in dealing with, the issue of crime in Western Australia. So it's a shoddy base for legislation, and certainly, I'll be going through that in detail when the bill comes before Parliament.
Manda asks, are you for Agenda 2030?
Well, that's a good question, but I'm not quite sure what Agenda 2030 is. So perhaps Amanda could illuminate the issue for me. And I'm looking across here at my assistant, and look, if he doesn't know what it is, then, he's normally on top of these things. So, look, I'm sorry, Amanda, but perhaps if you could be a little bit more explicit, maybe I could answer the question.
All right. And Amanda also says, Facebook censorship has hidden your comment.
No, there you go. Well, you see these things from time to time. We had a post pulled down from TikTok. I mean, I wasn't calling for revolution to end, in government or something. I think my stuff is pretty benign, but apparently, who knows? So, the mysteries of the internet and these various apps was, thanks for that.
James asks, when was the last referendum before this one?
Oh boy, it was back in the 90s. I was listening, and I'm not a student of referendums, but I was at the function I was at with Senator Smith last night. He is a student of these things, and he gave a very, very good sort of précis, if you like, of referendums. The only referendums that have ever succeeded have been ones that have bipartisan support. That is actually the history of Australia. The last referendum was the referendum on gay marriage, which was, when was that? Yeah, I can't tell you here, but, that was overwhelmingly. It was supported by both sides of Parliament. In fact, Senator Smith was one of the proponents that put that referendum up. And he made sure that he put in sensible, he didn't go for some extreme position. He made sure that there were sensible provisions in that protected different groups in terms of impact of that and so on. And that succeeded. So, yeah, look, what is the point of the government going down this path? If you look at it, they've always set out to cause public division. Well, that's the thing they really, as much as, I'm sure in part there was some thought, misguided as it may be, that somehow this would make a difference. I think it is purely the vibe. They're not actually looking at it in any practical sense whatsoever. But I equally have no doubt whatsoever that they thought that this was a political wedge. Why would you do that on an issue like this? That's, and just dividing Australians. It's just dreadful.
All right, an easy one for you. What's the best pub in your electorate?
Look, the best pub in my electorate, we've got a few pubs. Can I say fewer than when I was a youth? I don't think we probably drunk more when I was a kid. But I might say people weren't necessarily 18 with drink as well. The laws are a lot stricter now. But probably the best pub, look, the pub that is most convenient to me is the Albion Hotel, which is just down the road. It is a fantastic pub. If you haven't been, go. Boy, they've got they've got an old Indian motorcycle in there that's in fully restored condition. And it's a nice old-fashioned pub. Good feel to it and so on. I tell you what, I was really impressed with. The function we had last night was at the Claremont Hotel. I'm sure a good number of you have been there, and if nothing, for no other reason, for its proximity to the railway station. But gee whiz, they've done the most fantastic job of restoring that hotel. It is really slick. So, really good. But I think most pubs are pretty good. I think pubs you know, you talk about things that should have heritage protection. I reckon pubs should, because it's such an important part of our society, and we're pretty lucky. Still got the Captain Sterling going, I think, as well. So that's a nice pub.
Steve says, help 50-plus-year-olds get jobs, not just Indigenous people.
Yeah, you know, it's a real issue, and you're dead right. I think it's improved a little bit because of the job shortage, that more older people are getting, are sort of staying in employment or being called back into employment. But you're absolutely right. You know, I was looking at some data a while ago. Kids born in the noughties, you know, since the 2000, on average, are going to live to 100. So there's, you know, despite all the doom and gloom, and I hate the doom and gloom that kids continue to get fed with, people are living longer and longer and longer, and people are healthy longer and longer. When I was a kid, now I grew up in a fudder, but people worked pretty hard. But when I was a kid, you know, by the time people were 65, particularly men, they were either dead or crippled pretty well, you know, they couldn't do a lot. And nowadays, people in their 80s are bouncing around the place, hiking mountains and all sorts of things, just because we're living longer, better medicine, but we're actually living healthier despite all the doom and gloom again. So, you know, and why would you exclude, you know, this idea of people at 65 suddenly they stop working? Crazy. And if, you know, for that new generation coming through that are going to live into their, you know, into 100 plus, they won't be able to afford to feed themselves if they stop working. So, yeah, look, it is absolutely imperative. And don't penalise people who are on the age pension. Particularly, can I say, the health card is the key one for many of them. Don't penalise them by losing their pension if they work. So, yep, I'm fully on board with that. It's a huge issue. Look, unemployment is probably going to go up, and then we're going to see this impact again of people over 50 really being the main ones that suffer from higher unemployment and lack of re-employment. So it's a good key focus for government.
You have quite a few more questions. You have some time?
Look, I've got all the time in the world, but I think people are probably getting bored, but I'm happy to answer.
All right. Steve asked, can we get rid of Matt Keogh, K-I-E-O?
There, look, I can tell you how you do it. Turn out at the next election and vote all those Labor people out. I mean, boy, they walk around Parliament, they've collectively got this smug look on their face because they have complete control of the Western Australian Parliament, and at the Australian level, they've got that same smug look on their face because he's federalist. So, you know, vote them out at the next election. Look, by middle of 2025, you'll have had a state election in March, and I think it's around then. The feds have got to go by then. Maybe it's as late as October 2025. I can be corrected on that again. Yeah, that is the chance. Just make sure you vote them out. Talk to your friends. We don't like to talk about politics, but the left never stopped talking about politics. It's time the Conservative side started speaking up as well.
If this referendum fails, should Albo resign?
Look, I think he should hang his head in shame for the whole process. I've just been disgusted by the behaviour of the Labor government over this. I mean, doing a referendum on a vibe, as I've said, I don't think anyone who really sat down and looked at what's already in Canberra and looks at what you actually need to do in those Aboriginal communities where there is, a high level of dysfunction, which is almost, very typically the remote communities, could look at this and say this was the right thing to do. He's done it. He did it. Let's be frank. He thought this was a political winner and they were going to go to an election, triumphant because they'd gone out and done this. And, to the great credit, the comment on educated people from Kate Cheney, most people in Australia don't have a tertiary education, and a lot of Australians haven't had much education. But as I said, I've got the greatest respect for people out there in the community. And, they've looked at this and they've gone, you know what? No. And you've seen that in the polling at the first stage. Everyone likes the broad idea of the referendum, but when they look at the detail, they go, no, this will not achieve what you say it will achieve. In fact, it's wrong for Australia. So I think Albanese, by all accounts, he was going to have a triumph in the referendum and then go to an early election to give himself another term. The scuttlebutt coming out of Canberra now is that they're going to push that election late. But, if this was the keynote thing of Albanese and he's been rejected by the Australian people, maybe he should put his hand up and give someone else a go. The trouble is, I think I've said to you before, if you think you've got to worry about the Labor people in Western Australia being a bit left-wing, they look like radical conservatives compared to their colleagues in federal parliament. They're a bunch of left-wing fruit flips. and whoever replaces Albanese, I suspect isn't going to be any better. But we can live in hope, can't we?
All right. Annette says, local council elections happening at the same time as The Voice. We need to encourage everyone to look into who their candidate would be, especially 18 to 35-year-olds, and it should be compulsory.
Yeah, look, it's always been the vexed issue with local government, isn't it, whether you make it compulsory or not. I'm not sure around that. I think that it's one of those areas where you want people who are interested to get out there and get involved in it. I think timing it with the local government elections is not good timing, and it'll confuse a lot of people, I suspect. Maybe it'll motivate a few more people to get out and vote in local council elections. We'll see.
Kate asks, what about 15-minute cities, Dr. Honey? Do you support such madness?
Well, that was the what everyone has to live within 15 minutes of the... Yeah, look, you have a look at Perth now. This is and it's fascinating. If you look at Labor's transport philosophy in Perth, it's 19th century thinking. It's all based on the fact that everyone works in the centre of Perth, and everyone can then catch public transport to the centre of Perth. That's what we've effectively got, a hub and spoke model sort of transport, or Metro and Express, a bit of constructing a circle loop. But most people don't work in the centre of Perth. You go to the outer suburbs, you go to places like Joondalup and Ellenbrook, most people work there, or they work right across metropolitan Perth, or they're FIFO, and they're working up in the Pilbara or the Kimberley somewhere. So they're never going to use the train or the bus. Tradies who are going from one house to the next, they're not going to use public transport. People working from home, this is, it's another topic. We should cover it, actually. We should get a couple of guest presenters in. I've got my colleague, the Honourable Jorn Sidmer, who's our spokesperson on Metronet, and I think he could give you a version chapter on this one, and I think it'll be interesting listening. So, we'll do it. But yeah, the idea mentioned in Western Australia and Australia, the idea that you're going to shove all the young people, they're never going to own their house. All they're going to do is rent a high-rise apartment, jammed in amongst other high-rise apartments, where their kids can't play in a playground. That is not a vision I share. Look, apartments have got their place, but the idea that the great majority of new housing in Perth has got to be apartments is rubbish. People don't work some people work in the centre of Perth, most don't, and there's nothing wrong with having those other suburbs that are out there and a bit away. Most people do. 90% of people use their car for transport. Guess what? 90% of people or more in the future are going to use their car for transport as well. So, let the green lefties get off this obsession of turning the clock back, to the 19th century, and let's live in the modern world.
Agnes says, thank you, Dr. David Honey. You should be our new premier.
There's a few people that might object to that, but thanks very much. It's a really kind thought.
Michael asks, so any dirt on why Dan Andrews quit?
Yeah, who knows? Look, I suspect he's going to be a bit like our own premier. He's hoping that he's probably had a bit of a nod from someone that he's going to nick off and get a job with one of his corporate mates that Labor's helped. We'll see. But look, I mean, at a serious level, and I said this with Premier McGowan, there are things I've violently disagreed with what he did and his attitude to some things, but I respected the fact that he did. The community service. It's a hard grind for people in Parliament. I'm not for many of you. It may not be apparent, but, it really is a very demanding role, and especially if you're in one of those senior roles. So, look, I wish him well for the future, but I'm glad he's gone. But have you seen the person they put in his place? There's someone who's even more left-wing than him. So I wouldn't hold your breath for good public policy in Victoria anytime soon.
All right, the last question. It's a controversial one. Dr. Honey, do you support any involvement of the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, and UN, any foreign dictators? And do you support a royal commission into everything having to do with the handling of the quote-unquote pandemic? And more suggestions.
Look, I'll go to the last one first, and that is, we've seen the federal government, they're going to set up, it's not a royal commission, but it's a group that's got a fair bit of power and so on. And they're not going to look at anything to do with what the states did. Well, guess what? The states did just about everything in terms of the restrictions, the controls, the lockdowns and so on. The federal government was responsible for the vaccine rollout, and they had some responsibility for remote Aboriginal communities. But otherwise, in terms of the majority of things that happened, state governments were responsible. Now, many people in Western Australia were very happy with what the state government did. Well, I've said this before. What worked and what didn't work? I mean, this is not the last pandemic we're going to experience, and a lot of evidence suggests that we'll see a greater frequency of pandemics for a range of reasons. So that being the case, wouldn't you dig into this in every detail and see where it's going to, see what worked and what didn't work? What was justified on science and what was just people politicking? Because there's no doubt whatsoever that a number of decisions made during the pandemic, I will say in Victoria and Western Australia in particular, were just pure base politics. Nothing to do with a health measure, purely to give political advantage to the Labor Party. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of having a proper deep dive into that. And let's really learn. It's not to go and score political points. It's to learn so next time we do it better. Look, in relation to those organisations, there's a real corruption of that whole process in those organisations. I mean, we had the Prime Minister, you may have seen, I've talked about how ludicrous that 43% emissions reduction target is. We had the Prime Minister charge off over to Paris, and they all got around and they all got a bit of groupthink going, and he came back and he said, we're going to do even more. He's living in some delusional fantasy land if he thinks that is possible, or that it's not going to utterly destroy our economy and all of those jobs for young people. We won't be talking about housing. We'll be talking about 50% of our youth unemployed, like there is in parts of Europe where they've massacred their economies. So, I think we've got to be very careful. There is a role for international bodies, but it's clear that they've become highly politicised. Let's be frank, they're highly politicised as ultra-left-wing socialist organisations. That's what they are, and then they're used to promote that ideology around the world. So I think this is where the countries that are paying for them need to step up. I know the US has done some good work here. They're going, hang on, we're not here to sponsor some political ideological organisation. We want you to focus on the issues of the World Health Organization. Then let's look at global health. And I think probably WHO is probably one of the better ones online side. But boy, there are some others that are pretty shoddy. So, yep, be careful. Look, they do have a place, and I think it's, Australia's a significant nation on the global stage. And having a place in those organisations gives us influence as well. So there's a good reason, but let's make sure they're not left-wing political ideologues, that they're actually agencies dealing with the real issues that face the world.
All right, that's the end of it.
Cheers. Well, thank you very much. Please subscribe if you can, and otherwise, wish you all a great weekend.